Hi, it's Eric from Home and Decor here. We're at HOMEDEC and we're joined by Suherman. And so to start off the interview, why don't you introduce yourself, what you do, and a little give audience a tease about who you are.
Hello everyone, my name is Suherman. I am trained as an architect. I've been working as an architectural designer for a good 17 years. I try to keep young, but work stresses me out. I am currently attached to a firm that undertakes a lot of commercial and retail design. I work across both small-scale practices and large-scale practices. So I've been experienced and exposed to large-scale projects, small-scale projects, architectural and interior design. Not very good at it, but beggars can't be choosers.
So can you share with us like what a notable project that you have undertaken, or a personal one that you have undertaken?
Okay, let's see. A personal one is the one that was our home renovation in Subang Jaya. That's what got me the spot on the couch here. In my previous offices, I worked for practices that have done high-end residential work, master planning, and also retail and commercial work. Some of my notable contributions and engagements are I've worked on a couple of master plans, both as a project manager and as a lead designer. My last significant role was as a lead designer to a fair number of parcels in Pantai Central Park. So if you see the residential condo that's coming up right there, I helped lead the design team on that. In a smaller capacity previously, I have contributed to some transportation design work, transportation buildings. My first building that ever came up was actually a good 18 years ago. It's a small clinic in Sungai Buloh. That was way before the hospital came up, near the lepers colony. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. So from a clinic to a hospital.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Now, you have undertaken a lot of projects as you have described over the years. So, what to you was the most challenging of those projects? Do you think commercial, retail, hospital? Which is the most challenging to you that you have ever undertaken?
I tell this to my designers in the sense that generally architect design isn't complicated, it's complex.
What's the difference?
Okay.
Complex and complicated.
Think of it as a process. If it's complex, I'd like to think that it's quite linear in fashion, but you just add more and more and more information to it progressively. If it's complicated, you have to deal with all that from the beginning. Then you have to pass through it and make sense of it. So I think if you look at it like a meal, and if you're overwhelmed by it, just portion it, and eventually you get to all the parts. Whether it's commercial work, whether it's residential work, you'll come across the same factors, which are the things that you have to consider as a designer anyway. But the variables will differ. Sometimes cost is a consideration, sometimes ever-changing conditions and requirements are a situation. That's even before you start thinking about how the market responds or might not respond to the work that you're doing. So as it is, as a designer, you're supposed to take the bad and make good out of it. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, it is a responsibility. I mean, you get paid for it, you train for it. But as I tell a lot of the designers that have trained under me, I'd like to tell them, you're spending someone else's money to do what you like. So you better not cock it up.
So when you go about designing your projects, how do you balance out aesthetics and practicality? And like, how do you do a yin-yang kind of thing with it?
You mentioned yin-yang.
Yeah.
That's literally equilibrium,
Yeah.
right? Between opposing forces, two different poles.
Yeah.
But sometimes the reality of design work is such that you try and find a balance rather than a true 50-50 equilibrium. And there's a lot of factors that you have to weigh in. One of the things that we start early on is in listening to what the client wants. And then you start to understand and pass through that to see what they really need versus what they really like. Because like I said, different clients have different aspects that they're looking for to be addressed, or different requirements. You could have a corporate client who's got a vision and not much else to it. You do the articulating for them. You have a residential client who's seen all of the world's best houses, and they'll put in front of you a curated Pinterest portfolio. I like this, I like that, I like this, I like that. We try to listen through in between the lines, because at the end of the day, what you need might not be what you like, but might end up being what you can live with for a longer period of time, and it doesn't go out of style. It doesn't go out of style. So one is a bit more permanent, one is a bit more long-lasting versus the other one being transitionary. Change is not bad, but change has got to be change for good, really, not just to follow with go with the times and be fashionable.
Now, a more personal question, like what's satisfying to you being an architect throughout your years of experience? Like, what satisfies you at the end of the day?
I grew up in the 80s, pre-internet, pre-PlayStation, where all the cars were manual, and we went out and had fun. You know, the kind that went out, got a scrape, came back and tried to hide it from your mother. Oh, nowadays, you go out, you get the scrape, the mother finds out before you do. So it was always a sense of going out and seeing what was out there, you know. I played with Lego. A lot of designers will tell you the same thing. But at the end of the day, design to me is a form of expression. You learn good things, you learn bad things, you learn and realize that some things work and some things don't. And throughout the course of your career, it forms who you are as a designer, your own values, your own approach to things, the things that you believe in, right or wrong, you do believe in it. What's most satisfying to me is the problem-solving aspect of it. If I can use the home renovation that I undertook with my wife, trying to keep me sane, I've had those ideals and those ideas since I started working. It has never been proven to that extent based on those combination of elements, but to see it work and to see it completed feels more like a vindication than anything else. I mean, at the end of the day, my wife just went, finally it was done. But and I sat down at our garden and just heaved a sigh of relief, thinking that we're done, and it was done the way I intended to. Now that's not easy, because we paid for the renovations, and it just so happens that I trained enough to be able to do the design myself. So it's a somewhat self-indulgent, but the way I approached it is quite similar to the way I approach a lot of design items. At the end of the day, it harkens back to that little curiosity in you that when you put pen to paper, not mouse to screen, and you're just working things out, and then it just suddenly, throughout the process, you find a resolution to it, and that's quite satisfying. No one sees it that way. That's the last thing you can present to a client, but at least that's satisfying to yourself. I didn't cock it up this time.
So for you, pen and paper, it definitely is like up here, and like computer design is the.
When I trained with pen and paper, so I still somewhat remember how to draft manually. But throughout school, there was a transition to using digital tools as well. And when we were schooling, I was one of the earlier adopters because I was curious more than anything else. And I self-taught and asked a lot of friends rather than going to a course. And what I found that to be was that it facilitated and it accelerated the work, but not the thinking process. So I enjoy pen and paper because it's the most immediate extension of the person's creative thought that you can materialize very quickly. You try and draw something on the screen, it's very easy to copy, paste, delete, erase, and save. But on pen and paper, you're just scribbling over the same lines over and over again, you're tracing new lines, and you're reducing the idea to its essence, which I think is a lot more satisfying. I've gone to an extent where if I wasn't satisfied with what I was drawing on screen, I'd put the tracing paper on screen and trace it back out again. But I like doing that. It looks dumb and weird, but that was my process. The main thing is that I find in understanding generations of designers, and I'll be honest, there's only been two. The one that I'm familiar with from my generation and the current one that I'm trying to train not to be too dumb, is that when you draw, your thinking process becomes a lot more volumetric. When you draw on screen, your powers of visualization and spatiality might not be as fully formed.
How's that? How's that? You know, like lost.
You know, it's ironic for me to say that because the current generation, which is brought up on digital tools, would have played first-person shooters.
Yeah, that's true.
Spatial awareness would have been second nature to them as you're just bombing through and just shooting everyone in your path. But I have seen designers who can draw in 3 dimensions, can't put it in 2 dimensions. And that's, I had that same look. I had that same look, but I said something worse, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, and then just cut it there.
Yeah.
But I realized that if you can visualize spatially, you're halfway there. You might be a crap designer, you might have no talent, but if you can think spatially, you can start the discussion about design.
So, a very general question, like, what is the future for you? Are you gonna take on?
My wife asked me this question 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do with your job? You're gonna stay there.
Oh.
You're gonna stay stuck doing that.
Are you gonna venture into interior design since like you have dabbled in it? Or is it?
Wow, this was the question that Emin should have asked me to prepare for.
Oh my.
I enjoy architecture, but I never believe that architecture is purely shell and core, and you get interior designers to fill it up. As an architect, you design spaces. Some design containers, but you design the spaces and the experiences that emerge or can be generated from it. As such, you think about the interiors as much as you do the exteriors. You know, you go around town, you look at magazines and you look at the internet and you think, that's a fancy looking building. And then you look at the interior shot and you think, that's crap. Then the opposite happens as well, that you have fantastic interiors. I'm not talking about the decorative aspects to it, I'm talking about how the space makes you feel. And then you realize, wow, I didn't know that the building this staid or this bland could contain such exciting spaces. So it's a little bit of inside and outside, it's a bit of both really. I've been fortunate to have trained with really good designers who've taught me what it means to be an architect, who've showed me what it's like to do good interior design, both small scale and large scale. So I wouldn't say that I would go into interior design because the truth of the matter is that my approach to interior design is more of an extension of the architecture. But of course, it doesn't only mean that the architecture informs the interior design, it could be the other way around. But due to my training, I will always think about architecture first. I currently oversee a studio of designers across the various stages of work, and I don't get involved in design directly anymore. I sort of like oversee and guide them, which is interesting because when I was much younger, design was all I could do. I was superbly disorganized. Didn't really understand what it meant to be an architect, but tried my absolute best, much to my mentor's chagrin. And I always told myself, I don't want to go into management, that's crap. I don't want to manage other people because I have a very low tolerance for not doing things a certain way. That's just me. Not your spirit. More like OCD or anal retentive. You can edit that out.
That too.
Yeah. But I realized that if I'm going to grow, I will eventually need to manage, which is what I'm doing already right now. So I might go back into design. I don't know. I don't think so. I always like the strategic aspect of design, where you start thinking about product planning per se. But building is also interesting. The challenge that I find is that these days you have so many different parties involved. To me, it takes a bit of the interesting aspect of design away. I'm more of a Steve Jobs person than a Tim Cook.
Yeah, that's true.
Or no, let me rephrase that. I prefer a lead author like Steve Jobs versus Tim Cook. It's quite an arrogant position to take because I believe that you need to have a sole author to get the best expression out of any design exercise. then able assistants to facilitate it. The caveat to that is that the author's got to be really damn good. You have old age designers like Dieter Rams or Charles and Ray Eames, whose work we're still celebrating because there's a universality and a timelessness to it. You know, when people talk about Johnny Ive, or the current generation talks about Johnny Ive, and then they forget you have someone like Dieter Rams, you have someone like Mies van der Rohe, or the Bauhaus School of Architecture, and those are where the principles came into play the first time around, and it felt pure. So I harken back to those times rather than now. But of course, in the design world, you have influences everywhere. If you were to ask me what would your biggest influence in design be, my answer would be it's not architecture. I indulge in all of pop culture. I indulge in all of leisurely pursuits that have got nothing to do with architecture, but everything to do with design. Product design, industrial design, movie set design, toys, anime, and stuff like that.
So it's like an umbrella of...
I would say it's what I find curious and interesting, you know, because there's a design aspect to it. It's just not spatial architectural, you know, and you could start fantasizing and imagining things, and then at the end of the day, design really is just about a form of expression, and part of that expression should be about who you are as a person, as a designer.
All right. Well, that's very enlightening. Now, last question before we wrap up this interview. Do you have any advice for homeowners? So, from your experience regarding home renovation or just like house design in general, like what to look for the potential homeowner?
Two caveats. First and foremost, I wouldn't be the first person you go to advice for. And if you do, I'm not liable for any cock-ups later.
Disclaimer.
If you talk about home renovation specifically, you have two major aspects to it, or two major viewpoints. You have the designer's viewpoint, and you have the client's viewpoint. And both parties will always feel they're emboldened because the client is paying for things, and the consultant or the designer is the one authoring it. I think in the normal market, the reality of it is that both parties have a role to play. The truth of the matter is that the client will know what they want, but they might not necessarily know what they like or need. And the designer is supposed to pass through that. It's almost like an education process from the designer to the consultant, but the lines of communication need to be quite open. And to a certain extent, a client should listen to the designer as the designer should listen to the client. One thing that I try to hang on to, and this was from my mother herself, trust your instincts. Of course, how you get to a point where your instincts are trustworthy is a different question for a different time, maybe next year. But you have to be honest with what you need, be honest with what you want, be honest with what you aspire to, let the designer guide you. Of course, sometimes you pick a big name designer to get that look.
Yes.
If that's the choice you've made, shut up and go with it lah. It's like you buying a pair of really fancy shoes, and then thinking, nope, I could do better, so I'm just gonna... There are aspects to design that should be true to what it is. Not necessarily to the client, but to the brief. Cost is another factor, but it's not the prime factor. In fact, what we went through is not the norm, but it got us to where we wanted to be. We had a budget, and we went over the budget by about 50%. We didn't have a time frame. My wife was very understanding. From the point we took the key to the point we moved in was almost 30 months.
Wow.
That wasn't how long the renovation took. Don't get me wrong.
It's more.
But I was very honest with what I wanted to do. Parts of it was self-indulgent. Parts of it was an opportunity for me to express what I've always believed in and the values I have as a designer. And the other part is to listen. See, I treated the wife not like a client, but as a person that would be using the space. and it was very important to understand how she uses space in her natural form. You don't want to stick a cabinet there just because it's the best place to do it. You want to stick a cabinet there because that's the most natural place for you to swing your hand, open the door, grab something, close the door. It feels like an extension of how you want to live. No, sorry, let me rephrase that. It feels like an extension of how you live. Because how you want to live and how you actually live could be two different things altogether.
Yeah, exactly.
So one is seamless and the other one feels forced, like you're trying to fashion yourself into a certain look and feel to it. So I think if you're going to take anything from that, because I went off tangent, is that you have to be honest
Yes.
with what you're looking for, with what you need, and what you want. Because it's okay to aspire, but you'd also need to sit down and think about the more silent moments and the more quiet moments and realize, oh, that's the one that I'm going to be living with for a much longer period. And if those are the bits that don't get addressed, or those are the bits that make me uncomfortable, then I'm always going to have a niggling feeling in the space that I paid a designer for based on what I had on my Pinterest board 10 years ago.
So it's like vision against reality. You gotta pull it down.
Oh, that's a nice way of putting it. When a client comes to a designer, there is an ideal. When it gets built, it's real. The answer's somewhere in between. But if you play your cards right, I'd like to think you can achieve a balance between both. So you get a bit of what you want and you get a bit of what you need. Because what you want is what you want to see first, but what you need is something you realize you really need it after living through the house for maybe 2 years, 3 years, and settling down into your common habits and practices.
All right, that has been a really enlightening interview. Thank you so much for joining us today, taking your time out, of course.
All right, thank you for having me.
Yeah.